This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work and who have an impact on how things are working here in Ohio. It's my pleasure today to be with Terry Russell, who's the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness Ohio chapter. And Terry, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today. So first of all, you know, there's a lot of action going on, a lot of talk. I don't know if it's going to translate into any policy changes, but right now mental health seems to be a topic that both the right and the left are agreeing upon. Now, you've been hanging around, you've been doing stuff on this issue here for at least a couple of decades.
Right.
So how did you fetch into this? And then do you have any insights as to why is this suddenly the topic du jour when it comes to public policy movement?
Sure. You know, I am kind of the historian or the old guy around here in the mental health system in Ohio. Most people know me because I've just been around so long. I've been somewhere, someplace. But it really all started when I was 13 years old with a brother who suffered from schizophrenia. And I think that was God's way of putting his hand on my shoulder and saying, get in this field and do something, because our family back in the 50s had no idea what to do other than sending him to state hospital. And I became his caregiver, and I love my brother. He passed away a few years back, but during that experience, he held that illness, not him, but the illness held our health hostage. And so what I did is I got out of high school and joined the military in 1950 or 1966. You don't join the military in 1966. I mean, you know, the war's going on, and it was just a bad thing to do. I was trying to get away. So when I came back, I decided to dedicate my life, and I have just been blessed because I went to Ohio State, got my master's degree, and started working in the Department of Mental Health right out of college, about 1976. And then about 7 years later, I'm the director of the Clark County ADMH Board, mental health, now called Addiction Board. At the time,
was Clark County your home, or
no? I'm from Columbus, but I just got that job, and then we merged into Greene County and into Madison County, so it was the largest multi-county mental health system in the state, and I did that for 23 years, and decided I want to do something else. I wanted to get out of this, and about 8 days later, they called me here to NAMI and said, the organization went through some trouble 14 years ago, and would I come in and just try to get them out of the financial, they were having trouble getting finances. And that was another blessing, because in that 14 years, we've become the biggest NAMI in the country. I think we do just tremendous work on education, advocacy, and supporting people with these terrible illnesses. But I've also seen the transformation of the mental health system. John Kennedy, back in '63, passed the Mental Health Centers Act that created all these mental health centers where you go in and get counseling and go out and try to live in the community. And then in 1988, we said we're going to close our hospitals and start serving people in the community. The problem is the money never followed the client. So we just let people out of the state hospital to wander the countryside.
That I heard the exact same thing from former Justice Eve Stratton. Why was that, do you think?
Well, I just think good public policy. We don't need to put all these people in these hospitals that cost $600-700 a day. So we can treat them in the community. I just don't think it was a priority back then, and legislatures were looking at ways of cutting budget, and they just kept cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And we were always on the top of that list. And unfortunately, I will say the last few years, I've never seen a bigger transformation in the support that we're getting. But unfortunately, it's because of all the bad situations that have happened all over this country that people have said is a direct relation to mental illness. And the fact is, it's a direct relation to mental illness and untreated mental illness.
Well, let me ask you this question. Going back to should we say the handoff, the baton was not passed properly from the institutional to more community-based. At the community level, was it due in part, perhaps, due to a local zoning, and people were resistant to that?
Absolutely. I also am my passion outside of just working for NAMI is housing. A person doesn't get better. We use this as a theme in our legislative advocacy a few years back. You don't get better if you don't have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and someone who knows your name in the morning. And we have people all over the state that get up every morning and nobody knows who they are. Nobody cares. Nobody sees. They don't know where they're going to eat. They don't know where they're going to sleep. just because they have a biological brain disorder we call mental illness.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is develop that community support system and get away somewhat from just counseling and just going in and getting medication, because that's not going to stop what we have going on. What's going to is treat these people like any other health. We would never let someone who has Alzheimer's be in the homeless shelters every night.
Right. Well, let's go back to the baton analogy then. All right, so we tried to hand off the baton from the institutional hospitals to the community-based. The baton got dropped. What can go on now to pick up the baton? Where is the baton? Who has the baton? Who should the baton be handed to next in this whole process now?
Well, I'm very optimistic, and I'm always somewhat guarded. But again, over the past few years, I think people have recognized the need. There's been more money given to us by the legislature.
Okay.
We restructured our Medicaid funding system, so now it is looking at the whole person and not just the mental illness. Our people die 25 years younger than most.
Okay.
But it's not from mental illness. It's from all of the smoking,
self-medication,
self-medication, all the living on the streets.
Yeah.
Some. But the point is, we now have seen a change. I've seen the governor get behind this. He just gave the State of the State. 3 times he mentioned mental illness.
Right.
I have sat in so many State of the States, never, ever heard the word mental illness.
Right. And I will tell you, from the probably 12 I've sat through previous to this governor, I never heard it either. But so, what specifically then? I'm just attracted to this whole baton imagery now. All right. So specifically, if we're not going, it sounds like community housing is simply a policy dead end due to local zoning and variance issues and people not wanting to have one of these facilities located within their immediate neighborhood. So what else could we be doing, can we be doing now that consists of this baton to be handed on?
Well, you know, the not in my neighborhood is one of our scenarios.
Right.
But that's just one of the tentacles.
Right. You also ran against the cave people, too.
Yeah.
Do you know what cave people are?
No.
Citizens against virtually everything.
Okay. Yeah, and I would agree with that. But the people are here.
Right.
So they're living somewhere. So what I've seen is a new emphasis being put on housing. I think we're going to see some more funding coming up, because you can't ask someone to provide care at a minimum level, or you're going to get minimum level care, and the people we represent are abused. So we're getting funding to increase that. We're also looking at some real alternatives of treating the person where they are, instead of going to a building and getting their counseling and getting their medication and leaving. We now have teams going out and meeting the person where they live, make sure that they're okay. Giving them that support system. We have clubhouses starting to develop where some people who can't work yet, but don't want to be sitting and looking at TV smoking cigarettes, they can go and be in a social environment and get to know other people and learn in those. They run their own clubhouses and they learn how to cook. They learn all of the social skills needed to live out here in the community. And we're seeing tremendous, tremendous research saying this works. So I do see a very high, how long will it take? I'll be gone way before it finishes. But I'm blessed that I'm at the first end of it. It's starting to happen. The other big issue is kids, younger kids. Since the Mental Health Act and closing hospitals, we've closed all state hospitals for kids. There are no state hospitals for kids. And the growing number of kids with diagnosable mental illness, 1 in 5, diagnosis of mental illness, only 20% are even seen by anybody.
All right. So then, so for some people like you and me, this is a matter of personal interest. But for Bobby and Betty Buckeye, who may not acknowledge that there's been any mental health issue in their family at any point in time, why would they care about fixing this public policy issue, do you think?
Well, I think if we're going to be judged is how we treat the most vulnerable and people who need, I think we have to just look at that first. And if you have a mental illness that's an illness, it's not a character flaw, these are illnesses. If they're not treated, they will impact society forever in their
Okay.
lives. If we can't, if it's a revolving from one place to one place, the cost is horrendous. It right now costs $1,600 to be in a private psychiatric hospital. It costs
$1,600
$1,600 a day.
a day.
And it costs $700 in a state hospital.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
So you care very passionately about this. So out of all this passion, what keeps you up at night with all this?
Oh, the calls I get. I don't know. There was a show on 60 Minutes here about a month ago of a senator in
West Virginia.
Virginia, who ran for governor. And he took his son, matter of fact, pink slipped the son to a hospital. Got to the hospital, there's no beds. They sent him home, and son unfortunately took his life, but also cut the senator up very badly. And I get calls. I got one over the weekend sent here in Columbus, sent to a psychiatric facility, and there were 14 people in the waiting room waiting for a psych bed. 14 people in the one hospital. And obviously the 15th that came in wasn't going to get sent there. So we had to find another facility. And in most cases, we don't find a facility. They go back and live with they go back to family, even though the family is ill-equipped to deal with some of the symptoms that are exhibited. So those are what hold me up at night, is that we just don't have the tools. I also want to say, God bless the mental health people out there working.
Okay.
They're our lifeline. The families and consumers I represent, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have anything. I mean, and they get somewhat criticized because they can't give. We want more than they can provide.
So is the solution then we need to get more hospital beds then?
I don't know if it's hospital beds. I definitely believe we need more community beds for longer term.
Okay.
That don't need all the supervision and the cost that go with that. But we also need a community support system where every individual with these illnesses has someone there to assist them when they're in need.
Okay.
Because that's where it breaks down, when nobody sees them for a week, and all at once they deteriorate, and then they go out and go to somewhere and do something, and next thing you know, the criminal justice system's involved, which is so inappropriate. People with these illnesses aren't violent. You talk about myths in our society. One of the greatest is if you have a mental illness that you're a violent person. The fact is, people with these illnesses 6 times more likely to be victims of crime than commit a crime. Now, the horrendous ones that we see all the time, and the newspapers and the media pick up on, absolutely, that's an issue.
Right.
And let's address that issue. But let's address it. A lot has come up about guns, and it makes me sick when we see that guns and mental illness are even discussed together. Because most people with mental illness don't have guns.
Okay.
They're never going to use a gun. They're never going to hurt anybody. They're going to be out in society, and if we become public citizens like the rest of us, tax-paying, go get jobs, 80% of the people with these illnesses can recover. They do recover, not can. They do if they're given the appropriate treatment. And then they're among us right now. You wouldn't even know. And that's what people don't understand. That 1 out of 4 people have a mental illness.
Okay, so let me ask this question then. You're a vet yourself.
Yes.
A lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome has recently been diagnosed in our returning troops. Speculation for why the increase runs all over the spectrum, from they're getting better at diagnosis, or multiple tours, and the warfare we're fighting now is a much more personal and intimate warfare than what has been fought for the past 100 years usually here. How do you see that flowing forward here in a state like Ohio that has a very large veteran population, and will we start seeing more stresses on our current system from this, do you think, and how do we adapt?
Absolutely, and I hope the people watching this sees this as a public crisis. I personally believe that even the other wars, people came back with the same thing, but the diagnosis wasn't there. People didn't know.
Okay.
When you come back from that situation, living in this country, and you find yourself there, and all at once you're back, and you say, and your brain is functioning different than it did before. That is real. And everybody that's listening, if you know a veteran whose behavior is just not quite what it was, get them help. And I've heard a lot of things in Washington about the veterans.
Okay.
But I haven't really seen the thrust that I want to see
Okay.
in this whole PTSD.
Now you mentioned getting help. Would NAMI be a website? Okay, so you're sitting there at home, you're watching this, and you're going, I have a family member, I have a neighbor, a friend. I'm becoming very concerned about, or maybe even themselves.
Sure.
Would it be NAMI that they would look at the website up?
Well, I would ask them to go to NAMI and
what's the website?
It's NAMIOhio.org.
Okay.
Come to us, get to us. We now are putting Family to Family, which is our signature evidence-based educational program for families in the VA facilities.
Okay.
And we're having even outside the VA facilities, VA families only coming in. And this 12-week course is 2.5 hours a week for 12 weeks. Absolutely saves family members' lives. They know what to do. They know how to deal with it.
So somebody's out there watching, and not just the veterans, but all sorts of mental health issues. They can go to the NAMI website. You have your local.
All of our local affiliates. We have 50 local affiliates all over the state.
Okay.
They can
and
contact
who are
them.
they? Who are they primarily?
We're all family members or people living with the illness. That's this organization. We represent people living with the illness, people suffering bipolar and schizophrenia and major depressions, as well as family members who we call ourselves the voice of mental illness because we feel we're the conscience. We're the ones living with the illness. We're the ones every day our lives are affected. So we try to advocate what is the best for our loved ones. Second is we educate. And I really think that's as much important as anything, is educate every citizen, whether they have a mental illness or they have a loved one. We will educate you on every aspect of the illness so you can recognize, understand it, understand what treatment's about. And then the last one, which is as important, the one that keeps me up at night, is the support I give and we give. We get 100 calls here a day where people who just are begging for help, and we can tie them in all over the state to the appropriate treatment facility, or at least give them a voice to talk to instead of a machine. And I just find that important. Your
funding stream comes from then?
Well, we have a number of funding streams. We have our membership. We're a very large membership organization. We have over 500,000 citizens of the state whose lives have been affected by mental illness. Think about that. 500,000 citizens with over 100,000 members. We receive corporate donations. We receive foundation donations. We receive some state support for our educational programs and our support programs and our crisis line. And anybody who wants to donate to NAMI Ohio, that's always something we're always looking for.
Okay, now, once again, I'm going back out to the typical Bobby and Betty Buckeye watching this. And is there a book that you've read that you have found to be very helpful in formulating your thoughts on this topic, and anything that you advise people to read?
The last two books I've read that are mental health, directly for mental health, is a book called Crazy by Pete Early. Crazy. E-A-R-L-Y. Early, Pete Early. His book goes through his son's illness and through the criminal justice system, and it is so typical of those that call us. And he has become a spokesperson. He was a writer for the New York Times. Most recently, a 83-year-old mother of someone who had suffered from schizophrenia came in, and she wrote a book, Cat Chasing the Thief. And for over 50 years, that mother gave her life to the son in seeking treatment all over this country. And although some of it...
So it's Cat Chasing the
Thief. And what I liked about it was the hope. And that's what we in the mental health arena, all of us, everybody from people living with illness, families, people working in the field, sometimes the candle of hope goes out. We don't think there's any hope left. This mother wouldn't let it beat her. She just said, no, I'm going to go to the Miginger Foundation, or I'm going to take my son. I saw on TV somewhere in Baltimore. She went to Baltimore to a housing program. And it just gives you the feeling, I'm never going to give up.
Well, now, let me ask you this question. This looks like an ordinary ink pen, but it's actually not. It's actually a magic wand. And I'm going to wave this over you. Boom,
Okay.
boom, boom. All right. Now, you get to have a wish. So, what public policy change do you think would be the most helpful here in Ohio on this mental health policy issue, do you think?
I think it's time now for us to evaluate what we're doing with the money we have and show everybody that we are probably funded at a 50% level at best.
Okay.
We're so grossly underfunded. And that's from history.
Okay.
That's history. We lost $140 million over 7 years
Okay.
during in the first part of this 2000s. We have to get that back and get the funding necessary to provide housing, community support, case management, and continue the great work that the people are doing now.
All right, let me ask you a follow-up then. If you talk to some folks like Bill Denningham up at Cuyahoga County, he will tell you that there's been it's not a fair fight right now because the larger counties have had their fair, quote unquote fair share, in his opinion, reduced. Is that part of the overall aspect of this, or is that just a rising water will lift all boats thing? Do they need to be singled out for additional funding too, or is it just need to fund everybody more?
No, I think there is no doubt 70% of the most severely mentally disabled live in our 3 Cs, in Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati.
Can you say that again?
70% of the severely mentally disabled live in our big communities.
Why is that?
Well, I think because they gravitate from smaller communities that have little or nothing.
That's true.
And to get care here originally, and then they just stay.
That's true.
Because if there is care. And so there is no doubt that those counties should be looked at differently than other counties. But I'll tell you what, I have a mother in Marietta, Ohio, in Washington County, where they have very, very little, or I almost say no services,
Right.
whose son is every bit as sick as someone here in Cuyahoga County that needs care now and can't get it.
Okay.
And she knows where he's going to get it, and that's going to be in the local jail and ultimately the prisons. And so we have to fight for that too. So it's everywhere we need in Ohio, no matter wherever you have mental illness, everybody's affected by mental illness. No socioeconomic, no gender, no race. Everybody's affected the same. And so what we need to do is find a way of making sure when a person, early detention, that's the other thing, early detection. Early detection gets the care they have. By doing that, we will save millions and millions of dollars on long term, and that's where I'm really concerned about kids in the future. We're not treating them. They're going to be adults, and then what? Okay. We're going to have a worse problem than we have today in years to come.
All right. Well, this has been Gene Krebs. I've been sitting here talking with Terry Russell of NAMI of Ohio, and it's been a very sobering conversation today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Tune in next week when we'll be interviewing somebody else on some other policy aspect.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.